Alrighty, so in this section, we're going to be doing lots with rational expressions. So what is a rational expression? Well, it's a fraction, okay? Specifically, it will have an x in the denominator. So if there's any sort of x in the bottom, it's definitely a rational expression. Most of the time, there's x's in the top as well, but if there's x's at all in the fraction, basically top or bottom, it is a rational expression. So most of the things are going to be starting with factoring here. So we're going to first find all the numbers that must be excluded from the domain. So the domain of a rational expression is all numbers, so all real numbers, except those that are in the denominator, that make the denominator 0. So we're going to be looking for exceptions here. We have already done this before, but you're going to have to factor first. So the first step is to factor. And then you're going to take the denominator that's factored and set it equal to 0. Okay, and those answers will tell you the exceptions. So let's take a look at problem A here. We're going to factor the top and bottom, but 4 and x minus 2, those are already factors. So x minus 2, that's a factor. If it helps you to put parentheses around that to remember it's a factor, there's nothing that needs to be done here to factor that. So there's no GCF, this is not a trinomial, so it's already factored. So no need to factor. So then you're going to take the bottom, step 2, set any factors in the bottom equal to 0. Just the bottom, not the top, just the denominator. So remember, the denominator means the bottom. So you're going to set that equal to 0 and solve that equation. So if we add 2 on both sides here, we'll get x is equal to 2. So this is our exception, right? When the bottom is equal to 0. So the number that needs to be our answer here, the number that needs to be excluded from the domain is that x cannot be 2. It can be any other number. So technically the domain here is all real numbers except x cannot be 2. So let's look at the second example here. So the first thing we're going to do is factor. The bottom here is what needs to be factored. The top is just an x, so it's just going to stay the same. The bottom has 2 terms, and they both have a common factor. So here you're just taking out a GCF out of the bottom. So the top will stay the same. So this is step 1, factoring. The top will stay the same, but both terms in the bottom have a common factor of x, so we'll factor that out. That's the GCF. That will leave us with x minus 2 if you take out an x of each of these terms in the bottom. And then once you have that, step 2 is to take all factors in the bottom and set them equal to 0. So we're going to take the x and set it equal to 0 because that's one factor, and then the x minus 2 and set that equal to 0 because that's another factor. This one's already solved, but this one we have to add 2 to both sides. And so here our exceptions or our answers are that x cannot be 0 and x cannot be 2. So we're just looking for exceptions here, where the denominator is equal to 0. You're not setting the top equal to 0, just the bottom, the denominator. So the first step for part C is to factor. When there's 3 terms in the bottom like this, we know that's a trinomial, and here a is 1. There's a little invisible, there's nothing in front of x squared. So when you factor the bottom, you're going to be looking for 2 numbers that multiply together to get negative 18 and add together to get 3. So 6 and 3 multiply together to get 18. And if we make the 3 negative, those will add together to be 3. So our bottom here will factor into x plus 6, x minus 3. That's a trinomial with a equal to 1. There's nothing in front of the x squared, so that's an easy factoring. The top is only 2 terms. So if there's 2 terms, you're probably talking in GCF. So if there's 2 terms, look to see if there's a common factor. Well, 9 and 27 are both divisible by 9. So we're going to factor out a 9 out of the top and write down what's left in the parentheses. Take a 9 out of the 9x and you're left with x. Take a 9 out of the 27 and you're left with 3. So then step 2 is to set only the bottom, only the denominator equal to 0, not the top, just the bottom. So just x plus 6 equal to 0 and x minus 3 equal to 0. We'll subtract 6 here, and we'll get x cannot be negative 6, and then we'll add 3 here, and we'll get that x cannot be 3. So this is our answer here. So this was the answer for B, and this is our answer for A. So factor, set the bottom only, the denominator equal to 0, and solve. That's how you find the exclusions from the domain. The second thing that we're going to do here is we're going to simplify rational expressions. Okay? So we're going to simplify rational expressions. Okay? Again, the first step, forget this again, is to factor, top and bottom. Okay? Then, if you have a common factor, so if we look back here at this last one that we just did, part C. This guy, there was a common factor in the bottom and the top. This x minus 3 was in common. So if that's the case and we're simplifying rational expressions, if it's common in the top and the bottom, they're going to cancel. Okay? And then you just write your answer with only the terms that remain. So very simple steps here. Factor, cancel, and then write your answer. So let's look at number A here. So we're going to first look at the bottom. That's a trinomial with A equal to 1. So we're going to factor. So remember, first step is to factor. So because the bottom is a trinomial with A equal to 1, we're going to look for two numbers that multiply together to get negative 18 and add together to get 3. Yes, we just did this one a second ago. So that's going to be a positive 6 and a negative 3 multiplied together to get negative 18. And when we make the 3 negative, that will add together to get 3. So the bottom will factor into x plus 6, x minus 3. The top is 2 terms. If there's just 2 terms, you're probably going to be looking for a common factor. So 9 and 27 both are divisible by 9, so that's going to be your GCF. You write that in front. Divide 9x by 9, and you're going to be left with just x. Divide 27 by 9, and you're going to be left with 3. So this is just like the one that we just did. So if we have a common factor here, x minus 3 and x minus 3, those are going to cancel because it's common in the top and the bottom. And so then our answer, so that was step 2, was to cancel common factors, and then step 3 is just to rewrite your answer with what's left. So in the top, the only thing that's left is the 9, and the bottom, the only thing that's left is x plus 6. So this is our answer. One of the things that's dangerous that a lot of people are tempted to do is cancel before factoring or cancel part of it. So down here you can see they tried to cancel out the x squared and the x's here, but that's not allowed. This is bad, okay? You can't do that because the x squared and the x squared is part of the whole factor, right? So this whole thing is factored, is a factor, right? Or it's not even factored yet. So you can only cancel out if it's the whole factor, like you can't cancel out the x and the x here. You have to cancel out the whole factor, x minus 3 and x minus 3. So be careful of that. So for example here, for B, you cannot cancel out those x squareds. Those are not part of the whole factor. You have to factor first and then make sure it's the whole factor. So when we can look at part B, we're going to factor top and bottom. The bottom is a trinomial with a equal to 1. No number in front of the x squared, so we're going to look for two numbers that multiply together to be negative 5 and add together to be negative 4. Numbers that multiply together to get 5, that's just 5 and 1. and one of them will have to be made negative. If we make the 5 negative, then we will get -4 when we add those together. So the bottom is going to factor into x minus 5, x plus 1. The top is 2 terms here. The last couple of ones that we've seen that have 2 terms, we've had a GCF. But there's no common factor here with x squared and 1. However, this is a difference of 2 squares because it's a subtraction, difference, and then 2 terms, and x squared is a perfect square, and minus 1 is a perfect square. So we are just going to factor this with difference of 2 squares. One's positive, one's negative. To get the first term, we do the square root of x squared. That gives us x. And to do the second term, you do the square root of 1, the second number, and that's just 1. So it'll be x plus 1, x minus 1. So that's a difference of 2 squares. Always the same, but just different in sign. So now here, we want to look for common factors once we've finished that and cancel. So here we have x plus 1 and x plus 1. And it only cancels if it's in the top and the bottom. If it's in the bottom together, they don't cancel. And then lastly, you're going to write your answer with what's left. So we have x minus 1 in the top left and x minus 5 in the bottom left. And that's our answer. All right, let's do one more example here for C. So again, if you have a GCF, you should always look for that first. So here we've definitely got a common factor in the top, and it's 2 terms, but we've also have a common factor in the bottom with all 3 terms. So the first thing we should do here is factor out the GCF. So we're going to factor 2x cubed, 6x squared, and 8x. 2, 6, and 8 are all divisible by 2, so that will be part of your GCF. X cubed, x squared, and x, the highest number of x they have in common is an x. So we'll factor that out of the bottom first. And remember, when you factor out a GCF, now you're going to write down what's left with each term. So the first term here, 2x cubed. When I take out a 2x, I'm going to be left with x squared. Second term here, when I take out a 2, I'm going to be left with a 3. I took out an x, so I'm going to be left with an x. And then the last term here, 8 divided by 2 is -4, so this will be a minus. And then we took out the x, so there's no x left. I'm just going to rewrite this. X squared plus 3x minus 4. The top also has a GCF. 4 and 16, both are divisible by 4. X cubed and x squared, the highest common factor is x squared. And then we'll write out what's left. So when you take out a 4 and an x squared here, you're going to be left with just x. And when you take out a 4 and an x squared here, you're going to be left with 4. And so we actually have to keep factoring here. We're not quite done with this one because down here, this is a trinomial with a equals 1. So that one we can look for 2 numbers that multiply together to get -4 and add together to get 3. So that's going to be 4 and 1 multiplied together to get 4. And if we make the 1 a negative, those will add together to get 3 and multiply together to get -4. So the top we're going to keep the same. And the bottom we'll factor into x plus 4, x minus 1. We just factored this part down here. We kept the 2x the same in the front. That was the GCF we pulled out. So we definitely have some common factors to cancel here. We've got an x plus 4 and an x plus 4 to cancel, but there's actually a few other things here. Because remember what x squared means? This means x times x. And so here you also have an x that's going to cancel out with one of those x's. Okay, so the x squared turns into x times x, and you're going to cancel out one of those x's with the x in the bottom. And 4 divided by 2 also is going to cancel a little bit because 4 has a factor of 2. So 4 we can rewrite as 2 times 2, and so one of those 2's will also cancel out with the 2 in the bottom. So we actually had a lot of things that canceled out here. I'll go back real quick and show you what I did one more time. So x plus 4 and x plus 4 cancel for sure. X squared, we can rewrite this as x times x, and 4 we can rewrite as 2 times 2. And then we have a common x that cancels in the top and bottom, and a common 2 that cancels in the top and bottom. So when we go to write our answer here of what we have left, in the top we have a 2 left right here. So we have a 2 in the top. That's the only thing, or not the only thing, sorry. We also have an x here. I almost missed that x. And then the bottom, the only thing we have left is x minus 1. And that's your answer. So now you're going to go do the check for understanding on Schoology. It is for a grade, and it's only going to be open this period. So you're going to go do that and finish it. It's for half a quiz grade.